All right, let's start then.
Okay.
All right, let's do it. Hey, Matrix Live, Ben here, and I'm here with it's Daenney, right? That's how we're
Yep.
pronouncing your screen name. Yes. And you've been working with Element for I thought it was for like a year, but we've just chatted, and it turns out that it was only since January that you've been working with Element.
Yep.
So hey, how's it going?
I'm good. Thanks very much. How are you
No.
doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, I mean it's a bit of a busy time for everybody, but
Mhm.
we are we're gonna make something good. Um, should we just start by saying what is it? What do you do for Element?
Right. So I am a SRE or an operations engineer or a systems engineer or a platform engineer, whatever you want to call me, essentially.
No.
And I help out with the infrastructure that powers both EMS, so
Hmm.
like our hosted Matrix services, as well as Matrix.org.
Right. Okay. Cool. So you're doing like a lot of operation stuff,
Hmm.
some server admin. Cool.
Yes.
But the reason, I mean, apart from that, another reason we wanted to talk to you today was you just have a lot of interesting tech stories and a lot of interesting tech interests, I guess. So, what is your background in this world?
So like from the technology point of view, I started with computers at a fairly young age. My dad used to work for a university, and like I went along as a little kid, and I met my first computer, and that was kind of where the whole story started. And then like it kind of just grew from there. I got interested in computers. It was interesting to me because I figured out pretty early that I can make computers do things for me, so I don't have to. Which is, that was the
Yeah,
kind of fun part for it.
that's always an interesting learning moment, isn't it? Automation.
Yeah, it's this really cool thing because it kind of makes you feel like a wizard, where it's like I have this army of silicon at my disposal and I can just make it do things, so I don't have to, which is great.
What is so you said you're involved in some data center automation. Um,
Yeah, so one of my earliest jobs in like the technology side of things was essentially working for a company that built out data centers. And one of the big things that they wanted to do at the time was just we need to get metrics. We want to know bandwidth. We want to know power usage. All these kind of things. So I helped to build out the original system that used like Snmp and did like all kinds of magical auto discovery things through the network to find all the devices that we had, like, set up the monitoring for it, and like
what's
as a consequence of it,
SNMP?
it's the Simple Network Management Protocol,
Oh.
which usually when things have the name simple and the name aren't actually all that simple.
Right.
It's not that bad, but it's fairly archaic. But it's essentially a way that you can get all kinds of like both like metrics, but also configuration data out of a system, and in some cases modify its configuration using SNMP.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So, but it's quite specifically data center focused, is it?
It's mostly anything that plugs into a network. So you'll find it on like servers fairly often. Power supplies, like the big PDUs that you have in data centers, they tend to talk SNMP. Printers generally talk SNMP, so you can get your toner status
Oh,
from
right.
there if
Oh,
you
I
want
didn't
to.
know all this. Funny. So it's everywhere, and I've just
It's
never noticed it.
kind of everywhere. It's, yeah, sort of, it hides in the shadows, but it's very useful.
All right. Super. All right. So the next thing on the list here I see is the X word that we don't normally use.
Right.
What
The
is all this
Xorg.
about?
So I think somewhere in the like late 2000s, early 2010s or something, a friend of mine showed up and was like, "Have you seen this amazing thing called Jabber or XMPP?" I was like, "No, I haven't." And for some reason, he managed to like, I guess, nerd snipe me into it. So I got really interested in what it was doing and how it was working. So I spent some time in the XMPP community. I used to help out with some prosody related things. I maintained a thing called Urbot, which is like a Python bot framework, which in turn also talks XMPP, although it also works for IRC and Slack and other things. So I did a whole bunch of that for a while, but eventually my interest in it kind of faded.
Fair enough. But you mean that's cool. I mean, so I hadn't honestly until we started coming up with some notes to talk about today. I hadn't realized that that's what you've been doing. So that's actually really interesting. Did you find that any of your learnings from that time apply to? I mean, obviously we talk about Matrix, but maybe there's some learnings from that time that apply to all technology.
Um, I mean, it was interesting just building a communications platform out of it and just figuring out all the pieces that you need to put together.
Right.
That was also like the early time where people started to talk a lot about like what do we do about encryption and like messaging metadata and all those kind of things that are much harder to encrypt and hide from prying eyes. So I feel like I learned a decent amount of things from there.
Definitely. So, I mean, you've had a pretty big interest in security and encryption as well.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you about your contributions to DTLS,
Okay.
and then we are going to go far beyond my knowledge of it quite quickly. So, could you give us an introduction to? Well, I mean, why don't we even start lower and just say what is TLS and why do we need DTLS?
All right, fair enough. So I think we need to go back to like the early 2000s there somewhere, where Netscape came up with this thing called SSL, or Secure Socket Layer, which was essentially a way of encrypting your HTTP connection so you could send sensitive data between two parties. That later got standardized into what's now known as TLS, or the Transport Layer Security, which essentially the same thing. You take TCP, you put TLS on top of it, and then you can pipe another protocol like in it, like HTTP or whatever you want, essentially. And it just ensures that no one can eavesdrop on the connection, that you can encrypt, and that you can authenticate the different parties.
Okay.
This all works because that's all like TCP specific, so it's based for like essentially streaming layers of data like TCP. The problem is you have this other big thing called UDP, the datagram transport, essentially, which
Right.
is stateless. But in order to agree on a set of encryption primitives, you need some kind of dance between two parties, essentially what we're calling the handshake, to agree on like which ciphers are you going to use, which hashes, which everything, essentially like the parameters of your encrypted connection. So in order to do that on UDP, you essentially want to take TLS, but you need to temporarily introduce statefulness over UDP so that you can complete that handshake.
I see. Okay. Yep.
That's
So-
essentially what we do with DTLS, where it's like, okay, let's take TLS, but adapt it to function for a datagram protocol instead.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so there needs to be a whole other component of the protocol, where it's stateful, in order to actually execute the handshake. Okay, super.
Yeah.
And what
So-
was your contribution to that?
So I wasn't involved with the protocol or the specification or the standardization of it at all. But I got involved in a project that writes the DTLS implementation for the Go programming language. It's under an umbrella organization called Pion, and the reason that it started there was because they were building out WebRTC infrastructure in Go. And one of the components of WebRTC uses UDP everywhere. It needs encryption according to the specification. It uses DTLS for that purpose. So that's where that started. I came in there for a completely different angle. At the time, I was trying to do some IoT-related things.
Okay.
And one of the things that I wanted to talk to was like the hardware gateway that IKEA makes, the Trolltree gateway.
Oh
that they
yeah,
use.
I know this thing. It's I've got it attached to my lights.
Exactly.
Right,
that
I
one.
know it. Yeah.
So that thing has an API which uses CoAP, the Constrained Application Protocol, which we're also using in like peer-to-peer element, but it's like an IETF specified thing.
Okay.
And one of the things that they specify is that you use DTLS for it with AES CCM, which is like the specific like hash and encryption thing that we use, and a pre-shared key essentially. So like if you look at the bottom of the gateway, there's this code that's encoded there, and that's like the security key that you use to talk to the gateway.
Wait, physically printed on there.
Mhm.
Okay, so
It's
this is
part of that QR code that you have that you need to scan from the IKEA app.
right. So this is I mean, this is something deliberately done. Then this is you're not adding this without IKEA's permission, or this is by design.
So like the way that they've created their gateway is like surprisingly well done. Like it's a piece of hardware and it implements just a whole bunch of IETF standards in order to be able to talk to it. So they don't have to approve my usage of it at all, because it's just open protocols that we can implement. The only thing that IKEA has said is we're super happy for everyone to try and use local control and our APIs for the gateway, but we're just not going to officially support you doing it.
Sure.
Which fair enough.
That's a reasonable position for them to take, I think.
Yeah. But because of that, I wanted, and because of my usage of the Go programming language and a lot of things, I wanted a DTLS library in Go so I could use Go to talk to the IKEA gateway. And that's how I found that project. So since they were only using it for WebRTC, there was no support for ASCCM or pre-shared keys in there. So those were my initial contributions to it, and I kind of continued as a maintainer since then.
Gotcha. That's, I mean, it's ultimate. It's the ultimate scratch your own itch.
Yes,
I have
very
this
much.
item. I need it to work, so I'm going to go off on a whole other project.
Yes, and you could have done it. Like there were Python libraries that already had it, or like bindings for OpenSSL that would work for it. But this was very much a like, no, I want this in native Go, so I can cross-compile it to my Raspberry Pi and whatnot. So we have to figure it out.
That's super. And is it now in production, which is to say in your home?
Yeah,
cool.
Very much so.
Brilliant. Cool. So this came from an interest in IoT generally. Have you got any other? What have you been doing with IoT?
Mostly just the typical home automation things. It's interesting. It's for like lights or some sensors to get some environmental data, or just build out your own home automation. Largely because I like having local control of everything. So like nothing in my home is actually dependent on the internet or a third-party provider. It's all products that work fully locally and that I control directly.
Do you think that there's do you think that the future of the home automation market is is in agreement with what you've just said, as in there's going to be more home stuff? Because I feel like Philips are going the other way, and you can get in real trouble if your internet goes out. These kinds of things.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it seems that we're very much going into you have to always talk to our cloud kind of thing, which I can sort of understand from the point of view, like it's all kinds of devices and it's at times somewhat complicated to orchestrate and whatnot. So it's very convenient to have that device connect to a cloud, and then the app, wherever the app on your phone is, whichever network, it goes through that cloud. You can find your device and you have like a bidirectional connection that way. But there are plenty of protocols available like Zigbee and Z-Wave that give you local control. So it doesn't have to be that way. It's just that the big players like Google and Amazon, significantly more convenient for them if everyone goes through their cloud. So that's kind of what you have to deal with.
Definitely. I mean, I see huge parallels here between the general centralization of the internet versus what Matrix is trying to do with in terms of decentralization. At the moment, we're trading, possibly technical complexity and an onboarding cost for the ability to control your own devices and your own everything. Destiny.
Yeah, it's a similar story.
Yeah. Have you been involved in any of the Matrix of Things work? Have you seen these people?
I've spied around a bit. I haven't actively done anything with it. Like I do have a thing where like it notifies me on Matrix if like lights go on or something, or if like a sensor trips, like as part of the alarm system, things like that. But not anything that actively uses Matrix to like store event or the metrics or to like interact with it. It's more just a notification system for now.
Yeah, persistence layer is an often a common use of Matrix there. Cool. All right, I'm looking. The thing is, so Daenney and I were talking before, and we've ended up with a huge list of things that you're involved with. So I'm picking up the bits of it. So we talked a bit there about the need for democratized and decentralized communications. This is something I guess that you've been thinking about for a while. You said you were an IRC guy of old, and then XMPP. What are your thoughts around the general centralization these days?
Don't like it. I understand the convenience, obviously. If I look at like how my parents or my siblings or just non-technology friends communicate, I understand like the simplicity of just picking up an app, putting in a phone number, and all of a sudden you can talk to like 10 million people across the globe. But the fact that always means that you have no control over how your data is used, where it's stored, what's done with it, as well as the ease with which like corporations feel that they can just change their privacy policy to give them all kinds of new rights over your data, and you're essentially forced to accept it, is really not how I'd like things to work.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I can see a huge part of our ecosystem is people who think that way. So let's not beat the. I think probably most people who are listening this long are already in agreement. So let's not beat the drum too much. All right, so hold on. So there's all these things that you've been doing. Tell us about Games Done Quick. What is this?
Right. So that's a whole different thing, and kind of what got me into developing a bit more on Matrix. So Games Done Quick is essentially a charity event that happens twice a year. Once, or the big ones at least, happen twice a year. Once in winter, somewhere in January, once in summer, usually July-ish. And essentially what happens is that speedrunners, so people that like to speedrun games, so you don't just play the game as intended, but you essentially try to go through it to completion
Okay.
as fast as possible, and sometimes with just completely bizarre hacks. Get together for a week, play games, and people just donate it. There's incentives, people just donate because they enjoy what they're seeing, the content and everything. And they collect all that money for either the Prevent Cancer Foundation or Doctors Without Borders.
Great.
It's like a week-long event. It usually gets a couple $1 million in donations. That all goes to, minus cost goes to those charity events. And it's a ton of fun. There's a lot of games that I used to play or that I've played with friends that get played during Games Done Quick, and they get absolutely destroyed by other people in hilarious ways. And
So it's like a
very
hackathon
entertaining.
for games for speedrunners.
Kinda, yeah.
Cool. No, I didn't know about that. So how does that relate to Matrix and what you're doing?
So I just wanted to have a more easy way of following the event, because it happens, or at least their schedule is kind of tied on the US East Coast thing.
Yeah,
so one of the
stuff
things that
always
was always
is, isn't it?
tricky was figuring out when's the run happening, yada yada. There's a schedule online and everything. But I built a Matrix bot that basically just announces the runs as they're happening. It can track donations. So it can tell you like, hey, we've crossed like the 50,000 donation mark. And you can use it to query to go like, hey, I want to watch the Pokemon run. When is it happening, right? And the bot just tells you like then and there, and it will announce it when it starts.
Gotcha. So actually, it's a little bit similar to what we did for FOSDEM this year.
Kinda, yeah.
With its scheduling and announcements and herding people into the right places.
Yeah.
All right, super. So I'm just looking at all this long list. There's a few other things on here, but we've actually talked for quite a while. Is there anything you wanted to add or say as your parting comments?
Ooh.
Oh no, I've ambushed
question.
you with that.
Oh no, that's okay. I think the parting comment is like just I started to try using Matrix somewhere in 2014, I think. And compared to what we had then versus what it's now and how big it's grown, I think it's gotten a lot better. And there's like this continuous investment in just trying to improve the clients, trying to make it easier for everyone to use. And I'm really glad to see it. I'm really happy to see the community grow. But also just seeing how it's becoming more and more accessible to non-technology focused like people. And it's nice to feel like you're able to play a part in that.
That's great. All right, Daenney, thank you for taking the time, and thank you, Matrix Live.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks everyone.